Hey, this is Adam from Billy Nation, a tribute to Billy Joel. Just wanted to do kind of like a reaction video, I suppose. I just got finished watching And So It Goes parts 1 and 2. Obviously, this is the new Billy Joel documentary. And I just wanted to give you my thoughts on it and hear from you in terms of some of what you're thinking about it, because there's certainly, I thought it was fantastic, frankly. If you haven't seen it, please do check it out. It's on HBO. Um, I've been doing Billy for 4 years now, and I thought I knew a lot about him, and there's just so much that came out in this documentary that I didn't know, and so much to unpack. And I hope to do some of it justice. There's so much more there, but I'm just going to give you my overall thoughts about this. First thing is the title, And So It Goes. So the song is from 1989 Stormfront album. It's one of the most beautiful songs he ever wrote, frankly. And I was wondering at first why they chose that song title for the documentary. One could say, well, it's just kind of, there's how it goes. It's just how it is. But I think that, to me, and again, my perspective is as a musician, and some of you may not know this too, but I'm also an academic. So I come to it from sort of a very critical analysis standpoint. But to me, it's really more about that. It's really a metaphor for Billy's life, and it's a metaphor for Billy's music. The way I think about it is that the song it's like a spring that's been wound really, really tight. Has all that tension, but there's no release of that tension in the song. So the chords in the song, if you listen to it, are really dissonant and unresolved. And that's his life. And this really comes out of music. And I wanted to, in thinking about both roughly 5 hours of documentary, I wanted to think about, or I separate my thoughts in two camps. One, the music, and one, the person, right? The life history. I'll do that, but with the caveat that, to me, these are two completely interrelated things. You can't really understand the music without really understanding his life. And I think that's really what this documentary does very, very well. It really melds these two things together. And this is where a lot of my learning has come. And frankly, I think this will affect how I perform these songs going forward. So let's start with, I just wanted to give you some things I picked up about Billy as a musician, give you my thoughts on that. A very serious musician he is. And I say that because, you get a lot of musicians that, like, once they become famous, they go off on their own, and they really abandon a lot of the things that what made them who they are. And I didn't really see that with Billy. I mean, he loved hanging out with the band. He loved being part of the band. And so you'll see in the documentary just a lot of those collaborative things. A lot of artists still use studio musicians for the album, and then they'll go and tour with the band. And every tour you might have a different lineup. He's got the same guys. Now he's had some turnover, don't get me wrong, and I'll talk about this a little bit more later. But he has the same guys for years, and gals too. And oftentimes the studio musicians are the band that he tours with. So he just loves being with the band. The second thing is, and I kind of knew this already, but I have a better backstory, his love of classical music and the central role that classical music plays in his songwriting. And And even though he kind of in his teens and early 20s went sort of more rock and roll, hardcore stuff, he always had that real deep love for classical music, and this played a huge influence in his writing. Um, the other thing that's also the case with him, and it didn't really talk about this too much in the documentary, I wish it had, but he's influenced by so many other genres. I mean, his songs are, you'll hear Latin beats. You'll hear even like "Don't Ask Me Why," for example. It's kind of it's kind of a Latin beat. He's got ragtime kind of stuff. That's scenes from an Italian restaurant, reggae. So the other thing is his classical album, Fantasies and Delusions, was among the best-selling classical albums of all time. And that really, I hadn't realized that. I'd heard some of the music from that, but that really struck me. The other thing, and I'll talk more about the classical piece here in a second, because to me, that really goes back to his unresolved issues with his dad, who was a classically trained pianist. The other thing that I found just fascinating was the staggering pace of writing, of touring, recording. He would go, for example, in much of the 70s and early 80s, he was doing an album and a tour every year. So it was nonstop. And the kind of pressure that comes with to write hit songs, and to be at your best on stage every night, that is absolutely staggering. So, and he did this for almost 30 years. So to say that he didn't work hard, I think is crazy. There's also, as a musician, I also I picked up a lot on the comparisons that were made between Billy and Elton. This was interesting. And Billy always, I think he always talked favorably about Elton. And they toured together for many years, even though it did have some rough patches. But I think he spoke really highly of Elton. But they're just very different, and complementary in many ways. But they're very different pianists. He referred to Elton as more of a rhythmic pianist, where he referred to himself as more of what he called a 5-finger, right? A lot more activity, rather than just sort of rhythms. Billy was also a lyricist, and Elton wasn't. Elton was an amazing songwriter, but he had but Bernie Taupin was his lyricist. So I think the way that people connect with Billy versus Elton is fundamentally different, because Billy's lyrics are all from his relationships with people, and where he was in his life at that time. So there was sort of a time-coded capsule for him specifically. So I'm always curious as to the trajectory of musical careers, and what was it that launched Billy into sort of stardom. It wasn't that he was necessarily writing better songs, in my view. There's a lot of factors that come together. Frankly, I think some of his best music was in the early to mid 70s. Turnstile's album was one of my favorites. And that was 1976. But it was the 77 Stranger album that really was a turning point for him in many ways. He got a new producer, Phil Ramone, who he worked with for many years. But I think there was a point, and it's in part 1 of the documentary, where they talked about, all right, what are the singles that are going to come from that album? And so one of the singles was, the first one was Moving Out, right? Great song. But the deal that they made was that his wife at the time was also his manager, Elizabeth, said that Just the Way You Are needed to be the second single. The weird thing is that Billy didn't even like that song that much. He didn't even know if it should be on the album, much less come out as a single. But it was, Moving Out did great, but it was Just the Way You Are that went to #1. That was his first #1. And that's the song that just propelled him to stardom. And sometimes there's just certain things that resonate with people. And I think that song in 1977 did that. I mean, it's a very well crafted song. It's a wonderful song. But it was just, I think there were a lot of things. He had a good label behind him. He had some great songs, a great producer. He's got his New York band with his New York attitude. And that song really just launched him. And that was really the beginning of a series of really strong hit records from there on. Next, I want to talk a little bit about the human story. The human story here, which is, I'll connect also to the music, because to me, as I said earlier, you can't really disconnect these two. His songs, as he says, are about people and his relationships with them, almost exclusively. And this is really a large part of the reason why I think that his music really resonates with people so much, because it's about, he's the songwriter and the lyricist. So it's all, he blends them together so well. And we all can relate to the kinds of things, whether it's falling in love, falling out of love, going into, feeling depressed, or all these emotions, becoming a parent, struggling, living your best life. All of these things we can relate to. And that's why I think his music has stood the test of time in large part. The second thing that I found, and this is really related to this, is his passion. He always was always really driven. And whether that drive comes from a desire to connect with his absent father, who was a classically trained pianist, or whether it was something else. I'm not a psychologist, so I'm not going to try to psychoanalyze this, but that passion came out in his songs, and you can tell, particularly early in his career, like how he would perform that was just so passionate, and his stage performances are similar. And this is the kind of thing that I really try to capture in our shows, is his passion for the music and the way that he connects with the audience. That was really, really key. I want to talk about a theme that really was throughout the film, and that was his dad. And that's my dad, back here. So I really personally related a lot as a man and as a musician to a lot of what was happening with Billy. And in some ways, my dad reminds me of Billy so much. And with the beard, when Billy had a beard, kind of looks like my dad a little bit. But his father left when he was very, very young, and his father was not very emotional. His family had escaped Nazi Germany, and left when he was, I think, 7 or 8 years old. So to me, that early wound is what I think shaped a lot of his life and music. It's profound, frankly. It shaped how he related to people, like, for example, relationships with women. His love of classical music, right? To what extent was that? I mean, obviously his father was classically trained, so his desire to impress upon his father, to make him proud, to connect with him through the piano and through classical music, to me, that makes a lot of sense, right? And that's, if his father stayed around, would that have produced the same, the same artist? And unfortunately, I think tragedy and pain often create great artists. And it's a tragic story in early childhood, particularly. And the piano was his salvation. In a world of chaos, living with a single parent, they didn't have, I think earlier in part one they talked about there was poor and then there was Billy Joel poor, right? So the piano for him was what he turned to when things around him were chaotic, and that was his salvation. That's what he poured his heart, and that was what was familiar with him. And they talk throughout the film about how he just didn't always feel comfortable around people, but he'd always be looking for a piano. If there was a piano he could play, he wouldn't play to impress people. He would play because that's his safety net. That's his comfort zone. And that really just comes from the chaotic childhood and the father wound that he experienced. And just like in the song "And So It Goes," there's that unresolved issue with his dad, even after they reconnected. And they reconnected because of him, not because of his dad, because Billy went searching for his father in Vienna, and that's where the song Vienna comes from. And they saw each other, but they never were able to resolve that. They never gained closure. They never became close. And to this day, I think that still really is a powerful wound for Billy. And that shaped much of his life. He never got over it. And that it's sad, frankly. And perhaps one of the byproducts of this was another major theme of the movie. It was a theme for sure, was his struggles with addiction. He often turned to alcohol again when the piano, which is supposed to be his salvation, when that, in some ways, the music business often turned on him with its excessive demands, with the price of fame, with with his former manager taking all of his money. When that piano, which represented that side of him that became so chaotic, what else could he turn to if it wasn't the piano? It was alcohol, and certainly that influenced a lot of his behaviors. It ruined relationships. It changed a lot of things for him. The other thing I wanted to talk about that I thought was really fascinating, I didn't know this much about him, was his family ancestry, right? Again, this connection with his father's side of the family. He talks about his mom. His mom was, I don't know if she was diagnosed, but it was almost kind of like a bipolar disorder, or manic depressive, frankly. But he talked a lot about his Jewishness. And this was really fascinating to me because I didn't know, I knew his father was Jewish, but I didn't know he identified himself that way. And I think he identified himself that way because of the tragedies that his father's family experienced. And he harbors a lot of resentment toward Nazism and fascism in general. In the movie, in the second part, he talked about how his grandfather owned a textile company, clothing company, and they basically took it from him, and he thankfully escaped. And if he didn't escape, his grandfather didn't escape Germany, and they were all Jewish, they would have been killed. And we would never have had Billy's music. So he said, they wiped out my family. That's what he said. They wiped out my family. And so he has this resentment toward Nazism and fascism that in 2017, that it sort of came to the fore. In 2017, we had the Charlottesville Unite the Right March, and he did a show in 2017 where he came out wearing a yellow star, which in Nazi Germany was if you were Jewish, you were forced to identify yourself as such by wearing a yellow star, right? So he did that. He wore it in solidarity to those who were oppressed by Nazism, as an ode to his family and his heritage. So he really still harbors a lot of that deep resentment. You could see it in his voice, and he was tearing up in his eyes just thinking about it. So it was a real, it really hit me watching that. The other thing that I picked up on was that in some ways his story is a lot of ups and downs, right? And I think that's true with all of us in life. In the 90s, when he decided to just stop writing lyrics, I thought that was really interesting, because he always said that he wrote music first, lyrics second. So by being a musician's musician, it's all about the music, and the lyrics, he did that because he kind of had to. And then by 93, after River of Dreams, he was kind of over it. I think that was enough for him. And so he wanted to let the music speak for itself. And then, but he really struggled with that, right? So they talk a little bit, I wish they maybe have gone into this a little bit more, but he really struggled in relationships and with alcohol. It was really, really, really a sad time. But there's also, with every, when life gets you down, his is a story of resiliency, because in 2011, he hadn't been touring for a while, and then he came back and played for the fundraiser for Hurricane Sandy that hit the Northeast very, very hard. And he had also around that time met his current wife, his fourth wife, Alexis. And it's just, I was fascinated where he sort of found this balance that was always missing for him. So he didn't feel the pressure to have to constantly make money and tour and write. But he also, with his new wife, got to really heal himself. And he had 2 young kids in his late 60s, early 70s. And he said this, he said, I want to give my kids what I never had, going back to the father that he didn't have. He wanted to be the father to them that he never had. And he was finally in a position where he didn't have to make up all the money that was stolen from him by his former manager, right? He'd made his money back. But it was now he could, with a supporting spouse, he could really be the dad that he wanted to be. And to me, that's really, really important and special, and sort of a way that shows his resiliency, which is interesting. I mean, if he could write music today, what would that music be like, right? With lyrics, where would that story go? What would that be about, right? I'll end with this. It's like, what's missing? What do I wish the filmmakers, what would I have liked them to talk a little bit more about? The first thing that came up to me was, as a musician, the band, right? I felt that didn't talk a lot about the band's departure, right? Particularly, I'm specifically referring to his early band, from the 70s, 80s, and even into the early 90s. There was a little clip about Liberty DeVito in the second part. And Billy just said, I'm really not going to talk about it much. It wasn't happening for me. But we made up. And they kind of left it at that. I would have liked to have seen more. Now, Liberty has his own book. You can go read that, and he tells quite a different story. So I felt that this is where there was some, editorial privilege, and kind of making Billy out to be, the truth is somewhere in the middle there, I think. So I would have liked to have seen a little bit more about that. And it wasn't just Liv. There was a whole other group of guys that dropped out or were left out. One thing that the documentary didn't do a ton of, it didn't go into individual songs too much and the meanings. There was some of that in there, but I think though that kind of content is elsewhere in other interviews with Billy. He's done deeper dives into the lyrics and things like that for a lot of different songs. But there really wasn't too much of a that didn't occupy a lot of space in the documentary. What did this song mean? What was it about? It did touch a little bit about some of the thematic, the themes of various albums that corresponded to where he was in his life at that time, which I thought was really, really interesting, right? The whole, for example, transition from California back to New York to make Turnstiles, getting sick of that West Coast lifestyle, and all of that. So those are two of the things. So I'm curious to see what you think was missing as well, and what you'd like to know a bit more about. You can post those in the comments below. And I'd love to engage in a dialogue about that. But anyway, I hope you found this interesting. I can say for me, it was, I saw myself and my father a lot in this story, which is not just about a famous singer-songwriter, but about a musician, a man. I resonated a lot with that, and I got to know him in a way that I didn't before, that I'm sure will only improve how I interpret his music, to really connect even better with the audience. So let's have a conversation. Let me know what you think down below, and don't forget to check out our upcoming shows, BillyNationTribute.com, for our full concert list. And I hope to see you at a show.